that music so much. Welcome to the very first episode. Oh my god, I'm hearing myself again. There we go. All right. Welcome to the very first episode of the Underground QA podcast, a podcast about quality assurance in the video game industry. My name is Ariel Smith, and I'm the QA manager at Extra Games. My pronouns are she, her. I have two fellow professionals with me today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Myron. I'm the director of quality at Wrangle.io, and my pronouns are he, him.
And Chelsea.
And my name is Chelsea. I think everybody's done talking, but now I can't hear anyone. I'm sitting all alone in this podcast on camera right now.
We can definitely hear you.
My name is Chelsea Curran Adams. I am a QA manager at Riot Games, and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm not sure if I'm talking over anyone.
Chelsea is
You're
definitely not talking over anyone. So go ahead and take a minute to figure that out, and I'll talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So today we're going to be talking about the same thing that everyone's been talking about to a certain extent in the past couple of weeks, which is the coronavirus and COVID-19, in part because the situation is forcing us to rethink what professional gatherings and information shares are going to look like in the short term. In particular, we had recently planned to have the very first Underground QA conference a couple weeks ago during GDC, and that, along with GDC, had to be canceled because of COVID-19 and the shelter-at-home orders that are currently going out in all sorts of places. So seeing as how this is like the kind of thing that we're going to be having to live with for a while, we thought it would be a good time to talk about what does that look like exactly? How are we going to handle living in this world where we can't meet in person and we have to meet virtually? We also wanted to continue to, do our mission, which is to provide a space for QA professionals to have a voice and to be able to talk about their discipline and talk about what's going on in the industry. And if we can't do that in person, if we can't do that at conferences, it really made sense to us to, at least for the short term, to start doing it in podcast form, and maybe eventually doing some virtual conferences or something along those lines. But I think a good place to start is like kind of to go back to before COVID-19 even became a thing, and to talk a little bit about, why we even started planning the Underground QA conference in the first place. Chelsea, are you able to hear me now?
I am. I'm
Awesome.
here.
All right.
Wow.
We're live.
Mood today. Fail faster.
Yeah. No, exactly. This is the early access alpha episode of the Underground QA conference. So yeah, why don't you kind of talk a little bit about like how we kind of came to start planning the conference in the first place, and like why we even decided to do that at all.
Sure. So I currently am the chairperson for the International Game Developers Association Special Interest Group for QA. Woo, that's a mouthful. And so part of my job with that is to create a community of QA professionals or folks who are curious about QA. It doesn't even need to be folks who are in QA. Part of that is to create that community. And through creating that community, I've gotten the opportunity to speak at conferences, to talk with a lot of different folks. And I just happened to meet Ariel. I happened to meet Sarah. I met Chris, who is Rodney Squint in the chat there. I met all of these folks, minus Myron, who I happen to know outside of life, or QA life.
Outside of life.
In my second life. So I met all of y'all through that opportunity, and we had a passion for bringing folks together. Ariel mentioned it. This is a way for us to get together and talk, and and it's more important now than ever. For reasons outside of COVID-19, because the industry for QA is changing so rapidly, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that. So there were a group of people who are passionate about it. We did the thing. It was months in the works, although I will say for next year's, if we're planning for GDC, or whatever, we'll start earlier. Um, we got sponsorship and everything through just having a network. So that's the story. That's the origin story.
Gotcha. Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, I remember we were kind of talking a little bit about GDC in particular, and we saw that this year, and this happened a few years before, but this year in particular, we noticed that there just weren't really a lot of QA centered talks, and we kind of started brainstorming like, all right, well, what if we did something for next year? What kind of talks could we do for next year? And then that kind of turned into, I think Chelsea was the one who really said, well, why don't we just do that? Why don't we just make
Yeah.
that a thing? Like, we could just make that a conference on its own. We don't need to wait for GDC. Let's just do it. And so, even though we had like only a few months to put it all together, to get the timing to sync up with GDC, because we wanted the people who were coming for GDC to be able to go, um, it really kind of came together very quickly, and I was I don't know, I was very inspired by how fast we kind of got that organized, got a sponsor together, got some speakers put together, and all that stuff. Um, but yeah, it was really exciting to see, and then it was just as frustrating and sad and disappointing to see when we had to cancel it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. Almost
oh
as
my god,
bad
I
as
dropped my
that
light.
phone call
Of
to
course.
the airline that I.
Yeah, that was a really rough situation. I mean, I was heartbroken. Like I messaged the channel um when I started seeing things and said like, "Hey y'all, we need to sit down and have a really serious conversation."
Yeah.
I think it was a little even too early for the group in some ways cuz we still made it still took us a few days to make the decision. And our sponsor was a big part of that. Since they're a small business, we wanted to be supportive of them taking the time that they needed as well to think about things. But I mean, I had like a had a lot of anxiety and just heartbreak around this not working out. That was a really hard situation, and um, trying to make sure that the group made the right decision for everyone here. That was tough.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when you first brought it up, I was not ready to consider it, because like to me it just seemed too early. I was like, well, we don't really know how bad it's going to be yet, right?
Yeah.
Like, and like at that point, my office, even though like my office has always had the option to work from home, we had not even like started suggesting to people that maybe they should work from home yet. And so as far as I was concerned, like our space was still going to be available for it. And GDC hadn't even been officially completely canceled yet. But people, like all of the companies were at that point where they were starting to pull out of it because they, weren't sure they were going to be able to be willing to send their employees to go. Um, and I don't know. Then when GDC itself was canceled, then it became like extremely obvious. Like, well, we definitely can't do this thing now, right?
Yeah. And then
But there
the
was this
small.
part of me that was like, well, I mean, are we even that big a group of
Right.
people? Like, there's only 50 of us in one space. It's not thousands, right? Like, do we really need to cancel?
Yeah.
But no, I mean it was definitely the right move, and I'm impressed that you even kind of had the foresight to think about it as soon as you did, when the rest of us maybe weren't ready to.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
I was like literally ready to get on a plane with like a a Tom Clancy mask and like a hazmat suit. I was like, I'm going. Ariel's making a lot of sense. It's only like 20 people. We can get it done. But then you see the governor, like state of emergency and all these other things, and then it's like the GDC is canceled. It's like, oh, all right.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this, like, it wasn't easy. It was definitely not an easy decision, but uh I mean, I think the thing that I also missed out on, what Myron isn't telling you, is that we were literally going to road trip up there, like a lot
Yeah.
of the folks, and we were going to come bust into extra games and like come have lunch, and come hang out. And so I think I'm sad that I'm not stuffing Myron and Chris in a car with a bunch of sound and video equipment,
Yes,
and driving up from Los Angeles.
Yeah,
yes,
and I was really looking forward to having everyone like come see the office, like and
Yeah.
just I don't know, like to just to be able to host something like that was I was really looking forward to it and excited about it. But I mean, all this is to say that I definitely think that we absolutely should still do in person live conferences like as soon as we are sure that it's safe to do that.
Yeah.
But definitely, we want everyone to stay safe. Um, all right, so the next thing I want to kind of talk about is just what do we want to get out of having this podcast and also eventually the conferences themselves once we're able to do them more, or again rather. Like we've talked a little bit about like wanting to give QA professionals a voice, but I'd like to hear from each of you just kind of on what specific things you think would be good to hear from people about. Like what is your sort of vision of what those conferences and also what potentially podcast episodes would look like?
Myron, you want to go
Myron, you go
first? Or?
first.
yeah. So I'll go first. So I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to so like my mission for the past several years has been to enhance and evolve the quality profession into the delivery space, because one of the things that I was noticing for a while is that like no matter how many professionals are involved with a particular product launch, at the end of the day they come to the QA leader, the QA manager, or just the QA tester, and they say, are we really ready? It's like, okay, all right, well, if I'm making the decisions, then maybe there's something I can be doing earlier on to start preparing us to launch. And so I'd like to broaden the conversation to bring people together, cross discipline or form cross functional agile teams that really focus on delivery as a part of every roadmap, as a part of every sprint, as a part of every sort of like work unit, so that we're aligned and we're actually able to launch the thing. So there's always the challenge of there being too much work to do. How do we get involved earlier on to make sure people are doing the right things so that people's lives are better generally? So that's what I'd like to talk about and get out of this podcast, out of this series, bringing voices to light and bringing teams together a little closer. That's my vision.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really similar. I wrote a presentation recently that I gave on Friday, to my organization, and I said everything we do in the name of risk. And I think I'm going to take that tagline a lot going forward. But the risk of us not getting together and talking about things is what we've really seen the industry and QA do for probably, I would say, prior to the past couple of years. What we've seen, for the 10 or 15 years before that, it's the limitation of career paths. It's the limitation of the conversations between studios. It's the limitation of passing technology between them. And having not started in video games, having started in software technology, financial tech, and seeing the differences between technology that's available to games and technology that's available outside of games, I'm really passionate about upgrading our ability to have the risk conversation, finding tools outside of humans, repeating testing to make really good risk-based decisions. It's not that I don't want people in jobs at all, and I don't believe that automation gets rid of jobs. What I feel like it does is it enhances what we're capable of delivering. What I like to tell my team is human brains doing human things. We're best when we have the opportunity to say what's good, not whether something passed or failed or did a binary thing. And so my passion with bringing things like this podcast and groups together is having the conversation about how we enrich quality assurance as a career path, as a group of folks, as an industry, because that exists and we should embrace that and try to move ahead.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that in like non-game software quality assurance as a legitimate career path is totally treated 100% like that is a thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a legit career path in the software industry. But in the games industry, it feels like everywhere I go, companies are trying to promote QA out of QA and into something else. Like that is their career path. Like, oh, you start in QA and you do the grunt work, and then you grow up to be a designer, or you move on to be a artist if that's what you're interested in. It's like this entry point for the industry as a whole, but then you're expected to either move into one of these different things, or you go into QA management specifically.
Yeah.
And I would really love to see us push the industry towards having people who say, hey, I really like QA. I want to stay in QA. How can I do that? And the answer isn't just, well, you become a manager.
Yeah.
Because there are like QA engineers, and there totally could be a viable space for QA engineers in games. And yeah, it's Snowshoe just said QA management / producer. It's funny because I I actually was a QA producer, and now I'm a QA manager. That was my career path.
They got you, man.
Yeah.
They got you.
Which is which is just perfect. No, but like, so it's I really would like to see us try and figure out what exactly makes a career QA professional in the game industry like so unique and special that they
Yeah.
are worth paying just as much as you would pay a senior designer or a senior artist, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think that's also part of the problem is like the jobs that you can get as a senior QA person, they might not pay very well unless you're in management. So the push out of QA also kind of comes from a certain extent from a pay standpoint. Just because like if you want to be a senior analyst, but a senior analyst does not make nearly as much as you would make if you were a producer, then well, you might just go be a producer because that's how you can pay your bills, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I'm really excited to share some of that progress that I've seen across studios. I'm super stoked about this stuff. And you're going to find it here. You're going to find it in this community of folks. Ariel, I'm so excited for us to dig into this. This is something that Myron and I have been talking about for years.
Yeah.
And have literally talked about writing a book about it.
Yeah.
We're
That would
that
be
passionate
awesome.
about it.
That would be
So
awesome.
yeah,
Well,
go ahead.
remember that thought like quality is quality is like quality is how you bring products to life.
Yeah.
And just like how do
Yes.
we bring that to the forefront? Because everyone knows it. Everyone knows it when they come to you on the last day in the last hour and they say, all right, hey, Chelsea, are we ready? Hey, Ariel, are we really ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, people are saying a lot, but like, I mean, just tell me informally even, like, are we ready? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, well, how do we elevate that?
Yep. I'm stoked. And I'm sorry if you hear my dog whining in the background. This is like She's looking at me. She's like, I really feel passionate about quality. I am going out right now.
I'm not sorry about hearing your dog in the background. I'm totally fine with that. So yeah, so like, what are just a couple things that you've seen at your companies, or maybe that you've even done to kind of push QA more in the direction of being a like viable career path for the folks at your company, instead of making them feel like they're getting pushed out of it?
Yeah, super good question. So for me, and all throughout my career, I think what I've really tried to strive for is making sure that we do the activities that show that there needs to be permanence, that the data that we're collecting is integral to the operations process, not just to the release process. And so for me, I've really been trying to drive with my groups the idea that the most important things that we do are non-testing activities. And I know that that's kind of sacrilegious. Like people in the moment are like, but I really do believe that. It's actually not the testing that defines what we do. And so what we've done is we have multiple career paths, actually. It's not just management. We have an architect or principal pathway. We have a technical QA pathway, and we have a management path. And so, really, you get to choose your own adventure, and we support that and have that going. And so, what I've been trying to do with other folks that I've been talking to is promote that idea. In order to do that, you have to expand the test activities. You have to expand what you're doing, and you have to have conversations with your stakeholders and your business about what is what's valuable. And sometimes they won't know, like they won't understand that risk assessment and sitting down and doing that activity as a team is so enlightening for the development team. They won't
Mm-hmm.
understand necessarily that creating a dashboard with mean time to fail is really important. But then when you give them that number, they're going to be like, wow, I had no idea. So sometimes it's just expanding.
So there were two ideas that you talked about in there that I think I'm very curious to hear you talk more about. One was the architect path,
Sure.
and then the second thing was maybe much more specific, but was mean time to fail. Well,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what both of those things mean to you.
Yeah. Okay. So the architect path is our subject matter expert path. It's specifically not technical. So if you want to go down the engineering path, then we have um, a separate engineering path. What we would say that architects are most geared towards are understanding the intricacies of the product or game or team that they're working on, and they're not interested in management, and that's okay. So imagine someone who's incredibly knowledgeable on the design process. They may be even scripting some design scripts in the background. They may be the most knowledgeable person on the character development pipeline, and we
Mm-hmm.
want to keep them in that space because what they have is precious knowledge. And they can apply that precious knowledge to other teams. Like if someone told me, Chelsea, as an architect, I want you to go and apply what you've learned on character pipelines to environment. I may not be amazing at it at first, but I'm going to be able to cultivate and grow that idea. So it's one of those things that you get the opportunity to develop it by keeping people sacred in the space that they're in. And an architect may even be a little more technical in nature, but they don't want to go the full pathway of being a software development engineer and test, an SDET. That is the pathway into engineering. So we want to be specific. QA engineers are actually, in some cases, considered analysts at other companies. And so I consider myself an engineer. I do some scripting. I'm a manager as well, but like I started my career in QA engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And as for mean time to fail, man, this is a great statistic. This is based off of having proper error logging. And so anytime that we get an error, that sets our mean time to fail back. You can start easily by looking at incidents. So incidents may be your key to figuring out mean time to fail and the most crude way of getting that. So imagine 24 hours in a day, you've got a service going on or a game. And in that time we get an incident or an error or a major bug, we would then stop and take the average between those times, right? And so a really great way for QA to be involved is to either manually do that or utilize logging to be able to cut that time. And you don't even have to calculate it. Like if you get the services correct, you don't have to calculate any of that. It's given to you. It's on a dashboard. The team can see it. And so I had a team the other day that discovered that their mean time to fail was literally 15 minutes. And it was mind-blowing and amazing because they were like, "Oh my god, we're providing rough service." And that's okay. It's okay. We have to accept that the answer might be bad, but we have to move forward, you know? And that's okay. It is totally a fine thing to say, I accept that this is the answer that we're given. Okay, how do we get better? Because we didn't know.
Fail faster.
Yeah.
That thing.
Sometimes 15 minutes.
I mean, I definitely think that like being able to just give information to people so that they can make more informed decisions is a huge part of what it means to be in QA. Because like we're really like the smoke detectors or the forward scouts of the company, in the sense that like we're out there trying to gather the information so that we can pass it back to the people who need to take that information and make it actionable, do something with it, right? So this sounds like a perfect example of a case where you said, all right, well, like let's see what our mean time to fail is. All right, here's this information. You might not like it, right? But the fact that they now have that information that they didn't previously have means that you just like created something valuable for them that they can act on, right?
Absolutely.
It's not really any different than writing a bug report. It's saying, here is this thing, this piece of knowledge that you can now do something with. And and like I think we tend to think of it in terms of like bug reports with reproduction steps, but there's all kinds of things that can create valuable information that might produce some kind of actionable information. I used to put this crash report together. So we would get tons and tons of crash reports and stuff, but it was all just kind of noise, and the development team never really knew what to do with it, except maybe try and fix the highest priority ones. But what I started to do is I started to take the total number of crashes and I would compare it to our daily active users and our average concurrent users. And so we could actually see like whether or not the title had gotten more or less stable from release to release. Mm-hmm. And so even if there wasn't, say, a really big, scary, single bad crash, I could say, well, we're actually significantly less stable this release,
yep.
Right? And that itself was useful information, because then they could be like, well, okay, if we're less stable, then maybe some amount of these crashes are actually all the same crash, or maybe we just introduced some code that's causing a bunch of different problems, right? Like just being able to have that piece of information might tell them, okay, well now we need to shift some resources towards focusing on stability so that we can figure out where exactly all these crashes are coming from. So yeah. I mean, I definitely think that it's super helpful to think outside of bug reports in terms of valuable, actionable information, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so like when I conceptualize like the role of a quality practitioner, I think about that as a person who can do four things. The fourth one is optional based on a special set of like criteria, like what you're trying to do specifically. But it's test design, test strategy. In most cases, I like to work with an agile practitioner, someone who knows how to apply those techniques within an agile process. I almost said process. Uh, within an agile team that's doing sprints, which whether it be 1 to 3 or 4 weeks, and then automated regression, someone who has the skill, and it varies. Like you can either be someone who's like doing frameworks and like recommending technologies and integrating, and actually like writing low complexity solutions like that are client facing or customer facing, But like the what you were talking about, Chelsea, is like looking further through the value stream and being like, hey, you know what? The ability to do test design is an actual thing. And so right now, typically you have people who don't have a sense of test design who are designing the monitoring. They're installing tools, and whatever the dashboard and the tool says, that's what they use. But imagine if you had someone who had test design skill that was actually looking at the actual features that added value to the customers that were all the way in the operational space, like in production, and saying, okay, we have these logs right here. Let me apply some test design and test strategies to that. And now we're validating that our actual features, our key things that we want to work, like functionally to add value and to help us compete or meet or lead in the market, are actually working versus this virtual machine is running or this CPU is operational or I can ping this. No, like let's actually move tests out into the operational space of our services so that we can know at any given point in time how much value we're providing for our customers and our users.
Yep.
And that's what you get to do
Yep.
when you identify test design as an actual real thing that is not just a stepping stone to something else, and you apply it across your organization.
Yeah. I think the key thing to note is that when people think about automation and test design, they generally tend to approach it from the gameplay perspective. And I think that's okay. We're in games. But you don't have to automate the game. You don't have to only design around the game to have amazing automation opportunities, to have amazing design space opportunities. Mean time to fail is something that's happening in the background, right? And we can automate that. We can automate so much of what we're doing, and it doesn't have to be the game, which is the place where people are like when you when you say like I'm gonna automate the gameplay, they're like, oh my god, don't do this thing, and you're like, no, it's gonna be okay. We're not gonna automate the gameplay, and that's an okay perspective to take. It's totally fine because you with your human brain can help supplement that. So I think anyway, I could talk about this for days, and obviously there's a passion for this. So this is the kind of thing that we want to do with this community.
Yeah.
And it's not just going to be me and Myron and Ariel. It's going to be you. Where are you passionate about it? And what can we do to have these conversations?
Yeah, that's something that I have personally been really passionate about when we first started conceiving the idea of having this podcast, is that I really don't want it to just be the three of us like coming back each week and talking, because that's not giving a voice to everyone in QA. That's giving a voice to three people in QA. So my personal goal is that we have at least one like new person on the podcast each time, ideally more than that. And I would love to even have people come on and like take center stage and talk about something that they're passionate about, and we can just kind of hang out and talk to them about it and ask questions and stuff like that. But like, I think that this podcast will be in its best form if the people who are on it each week are different, and maybe there's some number of them will stay the same throughout it, just to kind of help manage things. But for the most part, like, I really want to hear from different people, because I feel like I've been kind of stuck in a bubble to a certain extent for a while now, right? Like at my company, I'm the QA manager, and I currently have one test analyst that works for me, and I have one other test analyst that I'm hiring soon. Um, but there's just the three of us, right? That's not a lot of voices in a single company. That's not a lot of like a wide, diverse array of experience, especially when I'm, to a certain extent training some of them and all of the ideas that I have in my head. So like being able to hear from other people more about the things that they're doing, like just being able to hear from Chelsea right now talk about mean time to fail, like I need more of that in my life so that I don't become stagnant as a QA professional, because that's something I worry about, is that like I'm too stuck in my ways, and I think hearing other people talk about interesting things can help you get unstuck. And that's one of the things that we get out of things like GDC, is that we can go and hear other professionals talk about what they're doing, which is why it's so sad that there aren't more QA conferences and QA talks and QA professionals talking about QA in those sorts of environments. But if nothing else, I feel like we can get as much of that, as much as you would get from a conference out of a podcast, minus except perhaps the post talk conversations you have in the hallway with other people who also were at that conference and at that talk.
Discord.
But then there's Discord, and then there's also Slack. By the
Yeah.
way, if you haven't already joined the IGDA QA6 Slack, definitely do that. We should tweet out a link to that after this podcast, just so
I'm
we
going
can
to
get
put
more
it in the
people in.
stream right now, too.
Do it, because just being able to pop in there and be like, hey, I'm having this problem. Does anyone have any good solutions for me? Sometimes someone has a perfect solution for you, and they might be able to give you a really good idea that you can run with. So yeah, definitely join that Slack. Okay. Well, so I also wanted to talk about like how has the cancellation of GDC and other conferences affected the industry as a whole? So I think we see some of this already in terms of like the GDC talks being released virtually for free, and in other cases, major game companies are no longer making their big announcements at game conventions and conferences anymore. They're just kind of doing their own sort of Nintendo Direct style announcements. So, like, what does all this mean for the industry? Like, what is it? Is it bad that these conferences aren't happening anymore and these conventions aren't happening anymore? Is it good? Is it like where are we going to wind up going because of it?
So, go on, Chelsea.
No, go ahead.
Um,
Go. This, I was
I,
literally going to say like, oof. Let me take a minute.
well, I would say, like, from a glass half full perspective, I think that uniting people was a lot easier because we're like a lot more global now. But I would say now that we've all gone online, we've essentially flattened the world, and the opportunity to connect with people. There's been this evolution that's been happening since the beginning of work, right? Where, like, first it was most important what people did, like how many widgets they created, and then like how they did it. So we talked about like methods and processes, and now what we're focused on is like working where and with whom you want. And now that the world has essentially flattened overnight and we're all unified, and one of the things that I see is everyone's taking kind of a pause to focus on humanity, and that's actually connecting us. So that's what I see is happening. People are connecting in ways that just simply weren't available anymore. And I think organizations are going to continue, and conferences are going to continue thinking about, well, what do we do when there are no physical barriers?
Yeah.
Like what we're doing today.
Yeah. I mean, we wouldn't be here today without this situation. And while that's not a positive in some ways because we're all here, it's a huge positive because we're making sure that it doesn't die out. And so we're interacting in ways that are meaningful. Like Myron said, for me, I'm donating to the local businesses that I really care about. I'm making sure that I support small farmers. How can we do that in the video game and QA industry? Well, we can give people a platform to talk. We can make sure that we support those platforms and share them. And we can make sure that we are supplementing where we can. And honestly, I think QA is in a great position because guess what, y'all? We were doing this already. We literally made a conference to make these connections and to have this experience. And what we saw was within 3 weeks, we had almost 40 people who wanted to do this thing. And this is underground. Like we literally had no marketing. Our sponsor I think made a post on LinkedIn. But like, imagine what we could do if we used this network to send and share and enrich in that way. And that's why these things are here. And so when we think about like the future of E3, for instance, when we think about the future of GDC, I think we're going to see an interesting, like, smaller group of folks. They're going to refocus and retarget and try to figure out what's meaningful.
Mhm.
And we will also see an expansion of other services elsewhere. And that's okay. We shouldn't be afraid of that. I think in the game industry, we are opportunely secure because we've already started to facilitate these bonds. We're
Yeah.
already seeing my friends, like during the day, I'm in Discord probably 90% of my day if I'm not in meetings, which is, whatever. But I'm in Discord talking to my coworkers or my friends or whatever because I'm keeping these bonds. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that in our professional lives too. And this is making you really think about that. And I love that. And I hope that you choose to spend your career and social and gaming and whatever that bubble, you choose to spend that capital in meaningful ways, whatever it is.
Yeah, one thing I think is definitely different, and this is certainly a positive, is that I think a lot of these conferences are going to be much, much, much more accessible for people.
Yes.
Even though, like, yeah, you can't fly out to GDC, but if you didn't have the money, you couldn't fly out to GDC anyway. You know what I mean? And so now, well, if it's all virtual, that means it's completely accessible for you, in a way that it wasn't before. So I don't know. I'm actually really excited about that particular part of it, and I wonder if there's going to be an extent to which people, once we're out of this crisis, they look back and on all the things that we used to do and we used to kind of just take for granted as, well, that was the thing that we did. I wonder how much of it we're going to rethink, and we're like, you know what, that actually worked better when we were in the lockdown and we were doing it remotely. Like, maybe we should just keep doing that. But there was this particular thing that I really missed, of like having a meetup with other QA professionals like in person, and I missed that part of it, and I want to do that thing. But that doesn't have to be in the context of a broad, very general scope conference. Like, that could be its own thing. It doesn't need to get lumped in with all this other stuff. So I actually wonder if people are going to get used to the accessibility of teleconferences, and also get used to being able to pick and choose the things that they want to do. Because GDC, as an example, it is a very big package with a lot of things in it. But like, when I look at the schedule at GDC, I see maybe a handful of things that I actually want to do and I'm actually interested in. You know what I mean? So I think the idea of being able to pull out the pieces that you're interested in and just focus on those exclusively, I don't know. I think it'll be hard for people to go back to not being able to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think, you know, just making sure that you engage however you want to. There's going to be a rubber band effect because there always is after this kind of thing, which is like we will have moved completely digital and then we will probably contract and be like, I'm only going to spend time with this, doing this thing. And that's really natural. It's a
Yeah.
very normal human reaction to say, you know, I I want to engage in a way that I haven't been able to for months. Because quite honestly, y'all, we're in this for months.
Yeah.
And we should be conscious that we're in a marathon. We're not in a sprint. This isn't a 2-week thing. That's okay. Just it's okay if there's a rubber banding effect. We'll somehow normalize. We'll find it. It'll be
You mean
good.
it's not going to be over by Easter? Man.
Big sigh.
Big sigh.
Now I
Yeah.
need to change to my Easter Bunny Timo background.
Do it. Um, yeah. So I'm actually kind of excited for the short term because I think that specifically for QA professionals, in part because I feel like a lot of these conferences just haven't been very accessible to QA folks who tend to make a lot less than their comrades in the game industry, unless they're in management or some other kind of like higher tier position. But like I think that by having the accessible options to develop QA professionals like in their career, we might be able to start help like pushing towards the direction of having it be a again a career that people don't get promoted out of. I want people who like QA to stay in QA. That's a weird goal, but it's something I really am passionate about. Um, I get sad every time I see a QA person who loves QA become a producer because they felt like they had to. Um, but yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. Um, on sort of on a related note, how how do you guys feel like the shelter at home orders and just the transition from working at the office to working from home has affected like both the industry and testing in particular?
I think testing wise, it's made us really consider what's important and valuable and push on the teams to prioritize. What I've seen a lot with my groups is that in the absence of having all of the technology or agreements or whatever the situation, um, set up immediately, like right when we went home, it
Hmm.
made the team consider, like, okay, what's the highest priority QA needs that we've got? Let's go with that. I think, interestingly, it's allowed people to be involved in conversations that they may not have been involved in before. And I say that from a few different perspectives. So, like, for me, talking about our business continuity plan with our senior leaders, that's been really interesting. QA has been brought into that conversation. How are we going to keep our product going? For I think our more junior members of the team, it was, how do we start to think about this? What should I be thinking about as being integral to my daily life? And I think as human employees in general, we've started to think about what is important for me to be sane in my work life, um, and how do I do my job? And there will be situations in which um, we're not successful at that. I mean, I've identified areas that I'm not successful. I feel exhausted at the end of my week now, much more because there aren't 5-minute breaks between meetings when I'm walking from one place to another to grab a drink, to have a little bit of self care, and to have that kind of odd hallway conversation that we talked about earlier. Like, that used to be a regular part of my day. And
Hmm.
so I'm still trying to figure out how I do the tiny self-care I didn't realize that I was doing. And I think um, you know, the shelter in place side of things has made me a lot more aware of my folks that I'm directly managing and indirectly managing, their personal situations, if they're willing to share it. I've been asking a lot more, are things okay? Are you okay? And I see a lot more people doing the same thing. And that feels so good for people to be looking out and saying, like, are you okay?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, it's interesting. Like I when we were talking last week, I definitely felt like there was an extent to which my company at the time had been very very much like treating like everything was normal to a certain extent, and just kind of like because we already worked from home to a certain extent, so it was not a difficult transition for us to be like, all right, well now we're always working from home, right? Because most like almost all of us were already set up for that. there were a handful of people on the console team who had to figure out what they were doing because they had to, go into the office to use test kits and stuff like that. But we figured all that out. Um, and but for a minute there, it definitely felt like, well, everything's fine. We're just at home and we just have our kids in the background and, and we just can't talk in person. But well, it's all fine. We'll figure it out. I think in this past week there has definitely been more and more realization and kind of oh shit moments where people have just had that realization like no, things are different now,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and it's not just because we're working from home and we have this distance, but also because there's a sense to which we're collectively grieving,
Yeah.
and it's weird to have an entire company collectively grieving together,
Right.
um, because we don't do it the same. And
Yep.
so like I'll give you an example. We used to have this channel in our Slack called Random, hashtag Random. And hashtag Random was where we posted all sorts of like silly, goofy things, but also just like news articles and things that were going on, and it was kind of a lighthearted room. Um, but it also became the room where everyone started posting COVID-19 news stories,
Mm.
and everything related to COVID-19. So someone would say, "Oh, I think my wife has COVID-19, so I'm really worried about that," or "I just found out my father-in-law has COVID-19," or "Check out this article on COVID-19," and it became the COVID-19 channel. And so people started to leave it because they didn't want to be like constantly barraged with COVID-19 news, but there were other people who needed to have someone to talk to about it because they felt so like disconnected. So I I actually was like, all right, well, let's make a COVID-19 Slack channel because clearly there's a need to talk about it. But also I miss random and I miss I miss the fun silliness of random. Let's go back to having that. So I started very aggressively shooing people over to the COVID-19 channel if they had anything COVID-19 related to talk about. And I think that has helped. Um, and I definitely encourage people to try and find similar ways to deal with the sort of collective grieving that's
Yeah.
going on at your office, if you can. But like, I mean, definitely to what you were saying, it's just there's just a lot of conversations that are happening differently now. Like sometimes conversations that you wouldn't normally be in, you're a part of because like you have to kind of refigure everything out again, right? Like, and so things that were taken for granted, yeah, QA comes into the office, their test kits are in the office, so they can test at the office. All of that can't be taken for granted anymore. So we have to like have these conversations that are kind of upholding norms that we've taken for granted for years. um, and then on the other side, there's conversations that aren't happening that used to happen all the time, like those hallway conversations, lunch conversations, right? Like we used to sit down and eat lunch together every day, and now that just doesn't happen. So the sort of casual check-in, like, "Hey, what's going on with your wife? How was that movie that you saw the other day?" Like all of that stuff that doesn't happen anymore. So we've had to like find ways to make space for it. Um, so
You
like, what specific things have you guys done to try and adjust to working from home, like actively?
well, like one of the things that's really interesting is what you know how like when you ask someone, "Hey, how you doing?" and when people go from like "I'm good" to like "I'm not good," right? So that like actually like causes like different kinds of conversations. And just on the previous topic, just one note: don't watch the movie Contagion alone. Um, that's
Yeah.
it.
Phew.
So adjusting to so the first couple of days it felt I was super energized. Wow, like 4 hours. I get 4 hours extra every single day. 3 days later, you don't know what day it is. It's just like today's a day. Like you literally have to check. Um, and then it's when you realize, oh yeah, people have gone from I'm good to I'm not good. So now you actually have to actively check in on your team. So my team is like 20 people, and we have people, around the world, and so figuring out how to like check with people. Um, so like there was this moment where I was like, hey, Myron, you have these types of strengths. These are the types of things that you need to survive. When you go into the office, you kind of hide from people a lot, but now you actually need at least 3 or 4 interactions a day to have a good day. And so planning strategically to have interactions so that by the end of the day, I'm not completely exhausted and like the days run together. So those are a few things that I've done, like the interactions with people, scheduling those, playing a lot more online games with different groups as well to cut up the days, and finally bringing back in sort of like a normal like Myron set of like nap schedules. I don't know why, but I've always needed naps to transition in between different phases. And so those are the things that I've been doing to normalize in the work from home regular state of things.
Yeah, I think for me, um, the grief part has really hit me hard. And I think it's because I rely so much on people. That's literally my job. Um, I thrive around being around people. Some days it's easier than other days because I may feel more or less introverted or extroverted. But what I've really realized is human interaction is so key for me. So you heard me kind of pepper it in earlier. We created a Discord channel for my team and like teams around that to come in and interact. And we don't talk about work. It is not a Discord channel for work. It's a Discord channel for I want to feel another human in a space with me. And we've talked about everything from Animal Crossing to the stages of grief in that channel, and it's been really good. Our Slack channel, I see a lot of folks in the chat. Sarah talked about their Slack is blown up with new channels. For me, I have engaged with new Slack channels. We had a baking channel already, but I joined it. So like I'm super stoked about that. I think Stalin the cat mentions like I would make a routine, get up and have video calls, like get up and walk. Yes, do those things. Although, like, right now, what I'm facing in my kind of acceptance of this is I'm scared to go outside. It's a new feeling because I am a very outdoorsy person. I spend most of my weekends outside when I can. And in Los Angeles, at least, most of the communal spaces are shut down and walking on the street is crowded. And so I've been nervous to go outside. I still need to solve that problem. I don't have it yet. And I don't have answers for people who want to do it either. So for me, I'm learning as I'm going. And the other side of things is with my folks who are new to this. One thing I'm suggesting is to learn something new, and that could be taking a look into technology that they haven't used before. It could be playing a different game that might be understanding a different type of design or storytelling. And so, I think as people managers, what we can do is encourage new experiences and explore people's feelings. As QA professionals, what we can do is we can use our inquisitive natures to high advantage and allow ourselves to test things out. Does this routine work? Does this interaction with my team work? Does this kind of testing work? Okay, and so we also need to be accepting of that for our dev teams. Our engineers may be doing things that used to work that don't. We just need to be available to provide that feedback and get more involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So there were a couple of questions in chat. Does anyone video chat with their coworkers, or is it just text and audio? definitely in my office, we're really actively trying to get people to jump in a Google Meet and have a face-to-face conversation whenever possible instead of just having it on Slack. Um, so whenever there is like any amount of depth to a conversation, or if you need to involve multiple people in that conversation, that's a point where we would say, well, let's just jump into a meeting really quick, talk it out, because like sometimes what could take 15, 20 minutes to talk about on Slack could maybe take 5 minutes to talk about in a Google Meet. And on top of that, you get that face-to-face time that you wouldn't get otherwise. Um, our project lead has actually started doing something interesting where he is video blogging every day. So he actually has a morning video blog for the whole studio where he talks about like what's going on that day and where we're at with our project and upcoming dates and like upcoming milestones and all sorts of stuff. And that's been fun. And he's trying to make it like really kind of silly and goofy too, to like just lighten people up a bit. Um, so the other day when we announced our sharpshooter class for Torchlight, he did his video blog with a sharpshooter hat and a bow in his hands, just cause why not? Um, and just having that kind of like light morning video blog from him has been nice, and it's also been like a good way to again get more of that face to face connection to a certain extent. Um, and it's also been fun for us to talk about how we're going to cut these video blogs together to show Tyler's devolution into madness over time. Especially if his beard just keeps growing longer and longer, um, which I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, rip my beard.
Um, but yeah, I mean, and definitely like all of our stand-ups are video meets now. And even when we were working in an office, when we had people working from home, we had what we called the robot, which was like an iPad on a stand that we would move around, and so people could participate in stand-ups via the robot if they were working from home. But now it's just everyone is doing that, so it's been an easy transition for us to go from doing that. But I also like to have a longer, not stand up, but kind of morning conversation with my testers in the morning just to make sure they have everything they need, instead of just doing a kind of like daily check in. Like it's also a bit of a more personal check in where I'm like, no, now that we got the work stuff out of the way, how are you doing as a human being? Because like that I think is an even more important check-in than it used to be, is to just check in with people emotionally. How are you doing? Because the answer can change on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, um, you know, you might find out that like, one of your relatives is sick or something like that. And like, even if it's not COVID, right now, the idea of someone being sick is terrifying. My wife Jane has been sick for like 2 weeks, and we were hemming and hawing, like asking, well, is this COVID or is this the cold that I had 3 weeks ago? Like, but just having to deal with that in the back of our minds has been really, really stressful. Um, and so, like, when people have checked in with me at work, and I've brought that up, like, they've definitely tried to make, some amount of effort to reassure me and just kind of talk through it. But thankfully she's getting better. um,
Yay!
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The Zoom meetings for us, Zoom meetings basically all day, every day. Um, for the most part, like if someone's like literally, I don't know, like their internet's down, it'll be a phone call, or if it's like a customer call or something like that, and it'll be like a phone call. But you're right, Ariel. Like you'll be amazed when you ask that human question, "How are you doing?" And there are just things that you don't consider. Like I had one conversation, and it was with a young person, and at the time they were saying that the COVID situation only affects older people, and this person was having trouble um, connecting with her peers because um, they're immunocompromised, and so you know people will say things, and they
Mm.
because it's confidential, so they're not going to say, hey, actually, blah blah blah. But when it comes to like should I go outside or not, like so they were having trouble like reconciling that. And this is a person that had to actually go into the office to get a test device.
Yeah.
And so they're dealing with, you know, their peers are just not going to be as safe around them because they may think that, they're going to be okay, and they're all in the safe category. So having to navigate going to the office at like midnight and like avoid, your friends, like, whoa, like if I didn't know that and like the next day I was like, hey, what's up with that TPS report? It would have been game over. You know what I'm saying? So getting those connections, like this person, like we were
Yeah.
playing like Dominion online and like singing like major scales, do re mi. It's just like how do you connect with people? That's the most important piece. Like one thing that I did with one of the communities the communities of practice that I'm facilitating is I ask people to just say, hey, just throw out some things that are hobbies of yours. And then I create a word cloud and threw that in the Slack channel so that everyone, when they're talking with other people, they have a better target of like, what are some things that I may be able to connect as a human, instead of just being like, hey, how are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, so there's like a there's like a phase of like actually getting to know someone as a human, and then you get to ask them, how are you doing, and that be a meaningful conversation. So doing things like that to bring not only connect with people, to bring people together.
Yeah. Super key.
Chelsea, I just want to take a second to say that I'm obsessed with the shadow dog that you are currently petting.
She is. If I don't pet her, she'll cry. So
Oh, well, you got to pay attention to her then.
she's being a she's my best emotional support doggo right now. I actually had a conversation with someone the other day and I was like, out of all of this, all of our pets are the losers of this when we return back to work.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Well, thankfully, my wife is going to be continuing to stay home when we return back to work, so Shinobi, our dog, won't be totally lost. Um, but I ignore him all day anyways. It's not like he gets that much out of me being home.
Yeah.
Um, I think it's actually one of the reasons why whenever like we have a guest over, he immediately like wants to hang out with the guest because he knows that the guests will pet him the whole time that they are there, right? Whereas I pet him for a very small percentage of the time that I'm around. So he's got a much better pet to time ratio around new people than he does around me or Jane.
So the mean time between pets, then let's work that out operationally.
Yep.
Just saying, just saying.
One kind of tiny anecdote that I meant to share last time was it wasn't accidentally. I said something to a coworker via text
Mhm.
on Slack the other day and they misread my tone so much. I think we've become such tonal speakers in this era of
Mm.
video conferencing that I would recommend that even small reactions, like what I was doing was responding to them being like, "Oh my god," and they thought I was angry. They were like, "Oh
Mm.
my god." So, one thing I will say is just make sure that you're conscious that in this era of non-direct communication, you have to be very intentional about portraying emotions. And sometimes that means more emojis, y'all.
I
Yeah.
definitely try to use more emojis when I'm communicating with people virtually. Um, the flip side of that is also true. Like sometimes I tend to be overly defensive when people are talking to me online, because I'm interpreting what they're saying in the worst possible tone imaginable, whether that's fair or reasonable or not. So I actually actively try and like push those thoughts out of my head and be like, no, 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 no. I'm not going to assume the worst. I'm going to assume the best intentions, because assuming the best intentions
That's
is much, much, much better for both my mental well-being, but also for like the conversation that subsequently happens, right?
yes.
Because if you like, it's kind of like why people will sometimes tell you to smile when you're writing an email. I don't know if you've ever heard that
I've heard
before.
that advice. Never
But
done.
like it's
Man,
just
I'm right there.
because like
Man,
it helps put you in a mindset where you are more positive about the conversation that you're having, and so it'll change slightly the way you write and what you write. Um, and I think that like it sounds really silly, but it actually has really helped me to do that sometimes, because when I'm smiling and writing an email and I look at the email and I'm like, well, this doesn't convey how I'm feeling. I'll tweak it a little to make it, be more um, representative of what I'm trying to come across as in terms of how I'm feeling and how I'm saying the things that I'm saying. Um, but yeah, definitely emojis too. Emojis are good. um, so that's actually all the topics and discussion points I had written up ahead of time. But I did want to kind of take advantage of the fact that we have some folks here in chat to see if anyone had any like specific things that you'd like us to talk about, or any questions that you wanted us to answer that maybe we hadn't talked about. Um, And beyond that, I would also just love to get feedback on like what we should do for future podcasts, because I saw that a couple people had said stuff about how they would really love like a podcast dedicated to means or mean time to fail, like all in and of itself. I definitely think there's a lot of interesting conversations that could spin off into their entire own podcast. But yeah, Sarah or Lady Odd Duck in chat is compiling a list of topics. Um, I think we had, I don't know where the list is, but we had a list at some point that we had talked about doing. We've also talked about having some of us who are going to do presentations at the conference do them as like teleconference presentations, and then just kind of have the podcasters on talking to them about it as they go through it. So these are all some of the things that we're thinking about doing for this. But I would love to just hear thoughts if anyone has any. And then while we're waiting for people to answer, Myron and Chelsea, what do you think? What are some topics that you're really looking forward to?
well, I'm looking forward to talking about just cross functionality, um, building really great teams, and just quality and delivery in general. How do we accelerate?
Yeah. I think for me, uh, I want to talk about uh, what can we do to allow our human brains to do what human brains do best. That's a million different topics. It's automation, it's test planning, it's risk assessment, it's all of that stuff. So I would love to know from the audience, from your Slack messages, join the channel, let us know, directly talk to me, whatever you want. I want to know what you want to talk about, because we have people who want to talk about these things, and um, you will just never get me to stop talking about this stuff unless you give me direction. So please tell me what to talk about. So I'm not just sitting here talking. You have to listen to me.
um, but
No
yeah, for
questions?
me,
Really? No questions?
um, for me, I think Methods for handling playtests. That's actually a really good topic. It was really interesting when I first started at Extra. That was the main thing that they really needed from QA more than anything, is because of where we were at in our stage of development. It didn't really make sense to have QA dive in and start writing a bunch of bugs. What we really needed was good, solid, useful playtests. And the problems that they were having related to playtests were often quality related. Like the playtest build wouldn't work as well as it was supposed to, and no one tested it before we actually did the playtest. So we would start the playtest and then have to end it early, or not actually get to the thing that we wanted to playtest because it wasn't working well enough. And that even still happens even with QA, but it happens a lot less often because we're able to actually jump in and test the playtest build before we run playtests. But man, there's a million and one things we could talk about related to playtests. Maybe an open mic Discord Q&A.
This idea.
You mean just have everyone jump onto Discord and do a Q&A? Yeah, I'm down for that.
Yeah.
More than anything, I really want to just see I want to get extremely practical advice on how I can improve QA, because I feel like sometimes conference talks can be these kind of long stories that kind of tell a story about a thing that happened, but at the end of it, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to come away with, except for, well, that was an interesting journey. So I really like having the very kind of concrete, hardcore, specific pieces of advice whenever possible.
Let's do it. I'm in.
How do people compile test reports? What problems in communication that people have encountered and how they've solved that? That's a great one.
Can I ask a question about test reports? Is that reporting your results? Do you mean more of a test plan there? I would love to know more about what you'd want out of that, because test reports can be a few different things to a few different people. So I want to make sure we're hitting the right thing for you and your question.
Yeah, when I think about test reports, one of the very first questions that pops into mind for me is well, who am I reporting to, and what do they want? Because I can write test reports all day long that don't actually give value to anybody.
Yep.
Because nobody asked for them, right?
Yeah.
Or they don't give any information that's useful. So when I am at the very outset, when I'm conceiving of what is a test report and how do I write it, the very first question I have is, who is it for and what information do they need?
Okay, yeah. I love this idea. That's really good clarification. Ariel, I love your ideas too there in terms of what you've gotten for effectiveness.
Yeah, because I have found that for a while I was writing these really detailed weekly test reports on one of my teams that detailed all the tests that we did that week, all the major bugs that we found that week, the current status of every single feature in terms of whether or not it was shippable, polished, or broken. And I found that there was one piece of that people were actually looking at, and I was like, well, why the heck am I doing all this other stuff?
Yep.
Yeah. Reporting in general, the way I see it is reporting should inform decisioning, which should be a yes or no. And then there are a number of research questions that you go into it to get to a yes or no. So, for example, are we ready to launch? That's a yes or no. Okay, well, what are the research questions that you need to answer in order to inform that yes or no question?
Yep.
Typically, depending on the target. So, for example, if my boss or the producer or the product owner or product manager is asking me if we're ready, then I formulate a question that's a yes or no. Are we ready? And then I identify research questions and I go to the data to answer those. So that's what I mean. In broadly, when I say decisioning, it informs the yes or no answer, and that tightens things up significantly.
Yep. Let's do all of these things. I'm in, y'all. I'm in it for the long haul.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think this is a good chance to wrap up. Before we go, do either of you have anything you want to plug?
Yes. So here are some resources for you that are homework for you to take a look into over the next few weeks. Check out the Ministry of Testing. It's a UK based but international organization that has a ton of great test articles, a bunch of really great guides. They do training, do the thing. The second thing I will recommend for you is to check out the ISTQB. That's the International Software Testing Qualifications Board. Um, the reason why I say that is because it allows all of us to build the basis for a good language. So when we say things like test plan, we know what that actually is by a set of standards. The ISTQB is a board which has defined and set certifications for QA. And so I highly recommend it. I've got 4 of their certifications. You don't have to take the certifications to have access to the syllabus, to the glossary, and all of that. Although I highly recommend it. If you're looking to up your craft, if you're looking how to provide value to your company, if you're looking for how to be a better quality professional, Ministry of Testing, ISTQB, those will be wonderful, wonderful resources for you to get started on.
My
I also really like a software tester by the name of James Bach. He wrote a book with a few others. I think it's called Fundamentals of Software Testing. Let me actually double check to make sure I remember the name. It's been a while since I read it. But he is a really, really funny lecturer. Lessons Learned in Software Testing. That's what it's called. He is a really, really funny lecturer. He has very different opinions on the ISTQB than Chelsea does, but I think I think there's still value in the ISTQB despite what he says. But he also has really interesting opinions on testing in general, and I think that he is a very good voice to listen to, especially when you're first getting into QA. So definitely check that out if you're interested. I will link one of his talks that is one of my favorite QA talks I've ever watched. But he, again, take him with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't know how to speak the language, you can't have the conversation.
Yeah.
And so I watched some of his stuff before. I'm supportive. I think the thing to know is that if you say test plan and you actually mean a test case, I'm not going to say I'm not going to judge you.
See, this is actually why one of the very first things I do at every company I go to is I create a lexicon, which is I make a document that says this is how we talk about QA at this company. Now, it might be wrong in terms of the words that are in that might not mean the things that they mean to other people in other places, but at the very least, we can all look at that document and say, no. When we say test plan here, this is what we mean right here.
Ariel, just use the ISTQB definition. Make your lexicon from that. But I agree with you. I agree.
Creating operational language is key.
Yes.
I mean, and there's also a lot of other things that I put into that. It's not just like testing terminology. It's also things like game terminology and
absolutely.
like game engine terminology. But the reason why I don't necessarily always go to what the ISTQB says to call things is because sometimes I'm coming into a company where they have already decided to start doing things wrong, and so trying to get them to get out of their bad habits and start calling regression testing, for example, can be really hard. So I'm willing, as a diplomatic person, being the diplomatic person I am, I'm willing to go along with people being wrong as long as we all agree about the way in which we are going to be wrong. If that makes sense.
That was the most diplomatic answer you could have given that.
Yeah. Well, so
Cool. All right. Well,
gonna
Myron,
plug,
did you get your
oh
plug?
yeah.
yeah. So I want to plug two things. One, so it's not like too self-aggrandizing. I'm gonna plug the book, The Phoenix Project, by Gene Kim and a number of others.
Yes.
I'm really focused and passionate about delivery. I was sort of awakened to that through beginning thinking about quality as a way to bring products to life, and then going on to lead DevOps, release, and quality at a particular organization, as well as my journey and enterprise agile coaching. And it just is just an incredible book that shows how you can optimize a value stream. Um, and the second thing I'd like to plug is and another podcast that I'm actually a co-host in. It's called the Have Fun and Play podcast. It's at havefunandplay.com, and that's andplay.com. And it's available on iTunes, Stitcher, um, uh, Google Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Cool. All right then. Let's wrap up. That's going to be it for us today, folks. I want to thank Myron and Chelsea for joining the podcast today. I'd also like to thank everyone in chat right now, everyone who's been watching and listening. We really wouldn't be doing this podcast without you and without people who are interested in this and want to participate in this. If you have any suggestions for future topics, we'd love to hear them from you. If you are a QA professional and would like to be on the podcast, we'd also love to have you. In either case, please contact us at undergroundgameqaconf, C-O-N-F, @gmail.com, or you can reach out to us on Twitter at undergroundqa. Because again, we'd love to hear from you and collaborate. But before we go, I want to go out with a bug of the day. So today's bug of the day is a bug that I ran into when I was working on Star Trek Online. This is my favorite bug of all time. And what it is in Star Trek Online, we used to have something that we called the party ball. And the party ball, or the party bomb. And the party bomb was something that you could throw down on the ground, and everyone who was within the area of the party bomb would have to dance until the party bomb expired. But the something that we figured out is that if you die after throwing the party bomb down, it never expires. And there were certain places in certain zones that were public zones where you could kill yourself by removing your helmet while you were in a vacuum. So what people would do is they would throw a party bomb down, take off their helmet and kill themselves, and then the people that were there would be trapped dancing forever. So they would say, "I die so that the party may live on forever." That was
I can't,
far.
y'all. I literally I faced this boss in D&D yesterday morning.
You faced this boss? Was it they had irresistible dance as a spell or something like that?
Constitution saves.
Oh
Literally.
boy.
Yeah, woof.
So
I love this bug.
So I was playing a D&D game once, and we had an enemy wizard who had cast mirror image on himself, and there was also a pixie that was following our party around, and we convinced the pixie to cast irresistible dance on that wizard. So the wizard, with his 7 mirror images, all started to dance in perfect unison.
That's awesome.
So good. All right, that's gonna do it for us for today, folks. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye bye, y'all.
Wave until we're out. Wave until we're out. Bye.
The
party never ends.
The party never
Did you kill it, Myron? Can I stop waving now?
Yeah.